The year was 1966, and the autumn wind was cutting through the streets of Harlem like a straight razor. It was late October, the time of year when the heat of the summer finally broke, leaving behind a brittle, gray chill that settled into the marrow of the city. The leaves in Marcus Garvey Park had turned the color of dried tobacco, skittering across the pavement with a sound like whispering ghosts. The civil rights movement was shifting gears, moving from the hopeful hymns of the early 60s to a harder, sharper demand for power, and the tension on 125th Street was palpable. It was a city waiting for the next fire. Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson sat in the penthouse of Lenox Terrace, looking out over the kingdom he had spent a lifetime building. He was older now. The years were etched into his face, like a map of every war he had fought. The gang wars with Dutch Schultz, the prison riots in Alcatraz, the silent, deadly chess matches with the Italian families. He was tired. His joints ached when it rained, and his patience for the stupidity of young gangsters was wearing thin. He sat in his high-backed leather chair, a glass of cognac untouched on the side table. At his feet, resting on a thick Persian rug, was the one soul in New York City that Bumpy trusted without reservation. His name was Caesar. Caesar wasn't a pedigree. He wasn't a show dog with papers and a lineage. He was a survivor. Bumpy had found him 3 years ago in an alley behind the Flash Inn, a shivering, starving mix of shepherd and something wilder, defending a scrap of ham from 3 larger dogs. Bumpy had seen himself in that animal, the refusal to submit, the quiet ferocity, the dignity in the face of overwhelming odds. He had brought the dog home, fed him prime steak, and named him after a conqueror. Now Caesar was old. His muzzle was frosted with white, and he slept more than he fought, but his eyes were still sharp. He was Bumpy's shadow. In a life filled with people who wanted money, power, or protection, Caesar was the only one who just wanted to be near him. He was the only one who didn't care that Bumpy was the godfather of Harlem. To Caesar, Bumpy was just the man with the warm hand. Bumpy checked his watch. It was 6 p.m. "Shorty!" Bumpy called out toward the kitchen. A young man appeared in the doorway. Shorty was 19, a runner for the numbers bank who Bumpy had taken under his wing. He was fast, loyal, and smart enough to keep his mouth shut. Part of Shorty's job was walking Caesar in the evenings when Bumpy's knees were bothering him. "Yeah, boss?" Shorty asked, wiping his hands on a rag. "Take him out," Bumpy said, nodding at the dog. "Do the loop around the park. Keep him on the leash. The squirrels are fast this year." "You got it, Bumpy," Shorty said. He whistled, and Caesar hauled himself up, his tail thumping rhythmically against the floorboards. Bumpy watched them leave. He heard the front door click shut. He picked up his book, a volume of Nietzsche, and settled back into the silence. He expected them back in 20 minutes. 30 minutes passed. Bumpy looked at his watch. He frowned. Shorty was punctual. 45 minutes passed. Bumpy closed the book. He stood up and walked to the window, looking down at the street. The streetlights had flickered on, casting pools of yellow light on the sidewalk. He couldn't see them. An hour passed. The silence in the apartment changed. It wasn't peaceful anymore. It was heavy. It was the silence of a held breath. Bumpy walked to the phone. He was about to dial the front desk to see if they had seen the boy and the dog come back in, when he heard a sound at the door. It wasn't a knock. It was a thud. A heavy, wet sound, like a sack of flour being dropped against the wood. Bumpy moved instantly. He didn't ask, "Who is it?" He reached into the drawer of the hallway table and pulled out his Colt 45. He racked the slide, approached the door, and threw it open. Shorty fell into the foyer. The boy was a mess. His face was a mask of blood. His left eye was swollen shut. His lip was split, and his clothes were torn. He groaned, clutching his ribs, trying to crawl across the rug. "Shorty!" Bumpy dropped the gun and fell to his knees, grabbing the boy by the shoulders. "What happened? Who did this?" Shorty coughed, spitting blood onto the pristine floor. He looked up at Bumpy with his one good eye, and the terror in it broke Bumpy's heart. "They took him, Bumpy," Shorty gasped. "They jumped us, by the north gate of the park. 3 of them, big guys. They had a van." "Who?" Bumpy demanded, his voice turning into a growl. "Who took him?" "I don't know," Shorty wept. They talked funny, like foreign. They beat me down, threw me in the bushes, and they grabbed Caesar. He tried to bite them, Bumpy. He tried, but they clubbed him." Bumpy felt a coldness spread through his chest that was absolute zero. They had beaten a kid. They had kidnapped his dog. This wasn't business. This was a violation. "Did they say anything?" Bumpy asked, helping Shorty sit up against the wall. "They gave me this," Shorty said. His trembling hand reached into his torn jacket pocket. He pulled out a crumpled manila envelope. "They said, 'Tell the old man to check his mail.'" Bumpy took the envelope. He stood up. He walked into the living room, into the light. He opened it. Inside was a Polaroid photograph. Bumpy looked at it, and the air left his lungs. The photo showed Caesar. He was tied up with thick rope, his muzzle bound with duct tape to keep him from barking. He looked terrified, his eyes wide and pleading. But it was the setting that made Bumpy's blood turn to ice. Caesar was dangling over the edge of a building. The photo had been taken from a high angle, looking down. In the background, dizzyingly far below, were the streetlights of the city, looking like tiny stars. The dog was suspended over an abyss, held only by a rope tied to a steel girder. Written on the white border of the Polaroid, in thick black marker, were 2 things: $50,000. Midnight. Or the dog flies. Bumpy flipped the photo over. On the back, scribbled in jagged handwriting, "We are watching. No police. Bring money to the phone booth at 110th and Lenox." Bumpy stared at the image. He looked at the duct tape on the muzzle of the animal he loved more than most humans. He looked at the drop that awaited him. "Junie!" Bumpy roared. The sound shook the walls. Junie Bird, who had been in the back bedroom, came running, his shotgun already in his hand. He saw Shorty bleeding on the floor. He saw Bumpy standing like a statue of vengeance in the living room. "Boss?" Junie said, his eyes going wide. "What is it, war?" Bumpy handed him the photo. "They took Caesar, Junie. They beat Shorty half to death, and they took my dog." Junie looked at the photo, his face twisted in disgust. "Jesus Christ, is that a roof?" "It's a drop," Bumpy said. "A long one. Get Shorty a towel, get him some ice, and then call the crew. I want Whispers, I want Goldfinger, I want everyone at the Flash Inn in 20 minutes. "Who are they?" Junie asked, helping Shorty up. "Shorty said they sounded foreign," Bumpy said, staring at the photo, analyzing every shadow, every pixel. "Not Italian, not Irish. Russian," Shorty croaked from the floor. "They were speaking Russian. I heard one of them say, 'Da.'" "Russians," Bumpy whispered. The word tasted like ash. "They think I'm weak. They think because I'm old, they can come into my backyard and steal my heart." Bumpy walked to the closet. He put on his heavy wool coat. He put on his fedora. He checked the load in his .45 and slid it into his holster. "We aren't paying them, are we?" Junie asked. Bumpy turned at the door. His eyes were dead. "We're going to pay them," Bumpy said. "But not with money." Quick announcement before we get back to the story. There are 5 Bumpy stories I literally can't tell you on YouTube. I tried, but they are too raw for this platform and get removed whenever I upload them. I'm talking about controversial stories like The Priest's Confession and The Whisperer. If you want the full uncensored truth, I put them all in a private package. Click the link in the pinned comment to get them right now to support the channel. Now, let's get back to it. The Flash Inn was closed to the public. Bumpy sat in the back booth, the photo lying on the table under the harsh glow of the hanging lamp. His lieutenants sat around him. Whispers, the master thief who could break into a bank vault with a hairpin. Goldfinger, the money man. Big Sam, the enforcer who controlled the 125th Street corridor. The mood was darker than a funeral. In Harlem, you didn't touch a man's dog. It was a rule written in stone. It was cowardly. It was low. "Russians," Whispers said, shaking his head. "We don't have Russians in Harlem. They stick to Brighton Beach. What are they doing up here?" "They're freelancing," Bumpy said, his voice calm but terrifying. "They think I'm a soft target. They think they can squeeze me for 50 grand and I'll roll over. They don't know the history." "50 large is a lot of money for a dog," Big Sam muttered, looking at the photo. Bumpy turned his head slowly. He looked at Sam. The room went silent. "It's not about the money, Sam," Bumpy said softly. "It's about the line. If I let them take Caesar and live, next week they take Mamie. Next month they take the numbers bank. You let a bully take a crumb, he comes back for the loaf. Caesar isn't just a dog. He's family." Sam nodded, looking down. "My bad, Bumpy. We get him back." "We have 3 hours until midnight," Bumpy said. "The note says go to the phone booth. That's a stall. They'll run us around the city while they laugh. We need to find them before midnight. We need to find where this photo was taken." Whispers picked up the Polaroid. He pulled a jeweler's loop from his pocket and screwed it into his eye. He leaned down, studying the background of the image. "It's night in the photo," Whispers said. "But look at the lights. See that blur in the corner? That red neon?" "Looks like a sign," Junie said. "It's an E," Whispers said. "A big red script E. And look at the angle. We're looking down on it. That's the Empire Hotel sign near Lincoln Center." Bumpy's mind raced. Lincoln Center, the West Side. "And look at the steel," Whispers continued. "The dog is tied to an exposed I-beam. There's no glass in the windows. It's raw concrete. It's a construction site," Bumpy realized. "The new high-rise project on Amsterdam Avenue. It's been stalled for months because of the strikes. It's a skeleton. 20 stories of empty steel." "That's the spot," Whispers confirmed. "It overlooks the Empire Hotel. The angle matches perfectly." Bumpy stood up. "That's where they are. They're freezing my dog on top of an unfinished building in the wind." "I can get a crew," Junie said. "We can surround the place, storm the stairs." "No," Bumpy said. "If we storm it, they throw him off. They're watching the street. They want to see panic. They want to see me running." Bumpy paced the small room. He needed a plan that was surgical. He needed to get close enough to grab the dog without triggering the execution. "We play their game," Bumpy said. "They want the money, we bring the money. But we don't bring it to the phone booth. We bring it to the front door." "That's dangerous, Bumpy," Goldfinger said. "You're walking into a trap." "I am the trap," Bumpy said. He turned to Junie. "Get the money. 50,000 in small bills. Put it in a gym bag. Put a layer of cut newspaper underneath so it looks full, but keep the real cash on top. I want them to smell the money."
"And the Russians?" Junie asked.
"I'm going to talk to them," Bumpy said. "I'm going to walk right into the lion's den. Whispers, I need you to get to that building. Don't use the door. Climb. Use the scaffolding. Get to the floor below the roof. Wait for my signal."
"What's the signal?" Whispers asked.
"When I drop the bag," Bumpy said, "when that bag hits the floor, you come up shooting." "And me?" Junie asked. "You're the insurance," Bumpy said. "Get the Winchester rifle, the one with the scope. Set up on the roof of the tenement across the street. If they move to cut the rope, you don't wait for me. You drop them." "In this wind?" Junie asked, looking at the rain lashing the window. "That's a hell of a shot, Bumpy." "You make the shot, Junie," Bumpy said, his voice hard. "Or don't come back." 11 p.m. The rain had turned into a deluge. The streets around the construction site on Amsterdam Avenue were deserted. The building loomed into the dark sky like the ribcage of a giant beast, silent and foreboding. The wind howled through the open floors, creating a mournful, whistling sound. Bumpy sat in the back of the Cadillac, parked 2 blocks away. He watched Junie disappear into the darkness, carrying a long rifle case. He watched Whispers slip into the alley, moving like a shadow toward the scaffolding. He waited 10 minutes. Then he looked at Cato, his driver. "Drive me to the front gate," Bumpy said. Cato pulled the car up to the chain-link fence that surrounded the site. A single guard was standing in a plywood shack, warming his hands over a space heater. He was big, blonde, and looked bored. Bumpy got out of the car. He carried the gym bag in his left hand. He held his umbrella in his right. He walked up to the fence. The guard stepped out, a shotgun in his hand. "Closed," the guard shouted in a thick Russian accent. "Go away." Bumpy stopped. He lowered the umbrella so the guard could see his face. "I'm here for the dog." The guard froze. He peered through the rain. He grabbed his walkie-talkie and spoke rapidly in Russian. A crackle of static. A laugh from the other end. The guard grinned. He unlocked the gate. "You are early, Mr. Johnson. We expected you at the phone booth." "I decided to cut out the middleman," Bumpy said, walking past him. "Where are they?" "Top floor," the guard said, pointing to the external construction elevator, a rickety metal cage clinging to the side of the building. "Take the ride." Bumpy stepped onto the lift. The guard pulled the lever. The cage jerked and began to ascend. The ride was a slow ascent into hell. The wind whipped through the cage, stinging Bumpy's face with rain. He watched the city recede below him. He watched the lights of Harlem twinkling in the distance. He checked the mental map in his head. Junie should be in position. Whispers should be climbing. The lift shuddered past the 10th floor, the 15th, the 18th. It stopped at the 20th floor, the roof. It was an open slab of concrete, slick with rain. The wind was ferocious up here, tearing at Bumpy's coat. In the center of the floor, a fire barrel was burning, casting wild, dancing shadows against the exposed pillars. 4 men stood around the fire. They were drinking vodka from the bottle. They were laughing. And there, at the far edge of the roof, tied to a steel beam that jutted out over the abyss, was Caesar. The dog was shivering violently. He was soaked, his fur matted against his ribs. He was lying flat on his belly, his paws scrabbling for grip on the wet concrete. When he saw Bumpy step off the lift, his ears perked up. He let out a muffled whine through the duct tape. Bumpy's heart broke, but his face remained stone. "Gentlemen," Bumpy said, his voice carrying over the wind. The leader of the Russians turned around. He was a bear of a man, wearing a long leather coat and a fur hat. He had a scar running down his cheek and gold teeth that glinted in the firelight. "Bumpy Johnson!"
The Russian boomed, spreading his arms. "Welcome to the party! You brought a gift?"
"I have the money," Bumpy said, lifting the bag. 50,000, just like you asked. Now give me the dog." The Russian laughed. He walked over to Caesar. He grabbed the rope that was tied around the dog's waist. He yanked it. Caesar slid a foot closer to the edge, his claws scraping helplessly on the concrete. "The money is good," the Russian said, "but we are bored. We want to play a game." "I didn't come to play," Bumpy said, taking a step forward. "I came to trade. Money for the dog. That is the deal." "I alter the deal," the Russian sneered. "You put the bag down, and then you get on your knees." Bumpy stopped. "Excuse me? You are the king, yes?" the Russian mocked. "The big man of Harlem. I want to see the king beg. I want to see you crawl to me like a dog. If you crawl, maybe I don't cut the rope." He pulled a switchblade from his pocket. He clicked it open. He held the blade to the taut rope. One slice, and Caesar would fall 20 stories to the street. Bumpy looked at the Russian. He looked at the knife. He looked at Caesar's terrified eyes. He looked at the darkness of the stairwell behind them, hoping Whispers was there. He looked across the street to the roof, where Junie was waiting. He had to get them away from the edge. He had to distract them. "You want me to beg?" Bumpy asked loudly. "I want you to cry," the Russian said. Bumpy slowly lowered the bag to the wet concrete. He unbuttoned his coat. He dropped to one knee. The Russians roared with laughter. They pointed. They slapped their knees. Look at him, the great Bumpy Johnson." Bumpy kept his eyes on the leader. "I'm begging you," Bumpy said, his voice steady. "Let him go." "No," the Russian said. He stopped laughing. His face went cold. "I don't think I will. I want to see if dogs go to heaven." He raised the knife. Bumpy didn't hesitate. He grabbed the handle of the gym bag and flung it, not at the Russian, but at the fire barrel. The heavy bag hit the barrel, knocking it over. Burning wood and ash spilled across the wet floor, sending up a cloud of steam and sparks. "Now!" Bumpy screamed. Crack! Junie's rifle shot rang out from across the street. The Russian leader's head snapped back. He dropped the knife. He crumpled to the ground, dead before he hit the concrete. But he didn't let go of the rope. As he fell, his dead weight yanked the rope. Caesar was pulled over the edge. "No!" Bumpy screamed. The dog disappeared into the darkness. The rope snapped tight against the steel beam, vibrating with the sudden weight. Bumpy drew his Colt .45. He fired 2 shots, dropping the Russian on the left. The other 2 Russians scrambled for their weapons. From the stairwell behind them, Whispers emerged like a demon, a silenced pistol in his hand. Foot, foot. He took the 3rd Russian in the back. The last Russian, the one closest to the edge, grabbed the rope. He wasn't trying to save the dog. He was trying to cut it. He pulled a knife. Bumpy sprinted. He didn't fire. He might hit the rope. He threw himself at the man. He tackled him, driving his shoulder into the Russian's gut. They both skidded across the wet concrete, inches from the drop. Bumpy slammed his fist into the Russian's face. Once, twice. The man went limp. Bumpy kicked him away. He scrambled to the edge. He looked down. Caesar was dangling 15 feet down. He was spinning in the wind, the rope fraying against the sharp edge of the I-beam. He looked up at Bumpy, his eyes wide. "I got you," Bumpy yelled. "Hold on!" Bumpy reached down. He couldn't reach the rope. It was too far. The rope began to snap, strand by strand. Ping, ping. Bumpy looked around. There was nothing to grab. No pole, no chain. He looked at Whispers. who was running toward him. "Grab my legs!" Bumpy shouted. "Bumpy, are you crazy?" Whispers yelled. "Do it." Bumpy threw himself over the edge. He slid off the concrete slab, diving headfirst into the abyss. Whispers dove, catching Bumpy by the ankles just as he went over. Bumpy hung upside down, 20 stories above the street. The blood rushed to his head. The rain blinded him. He swung wildly in the wind. He reached out. His hand brushed Caesar's collar. "Come here," Bumpy grunted, straining every muscle in his core. The rope snapped. Caesar fell. Bumpy lunged. His hand closed around the dog's scruff. He gripped the wet fur with the strength of a desperate man. The weight of the dog yanked Bumpy's arm down, popping his shoulder with a sickening crunch. Bumpy screamed in pain, but he didn't let go. He had Caesar. He was holding 50 pounds of wet, terrified dog by the scruff of the neck, dangling upside down over Amsterdam Avenue. "Pull us up!" Bumpy roared at Whispers. "Pull!" Whispers braced his feet against a pillar. He gritted his teeth. He pulled, inch by agonizing inch. Bumpy swung in the wind, clutching the dog to his chest with his good arm. He looked into Caesar's eyes. "I told you," Bumpy whispered, his voice cracking. "I told you I'd come." The wind howled through the steel skeleton of the high-rise, a banshee scream that tore at the eardrums. But for Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson, the world had gone silent. There was no wind. There was no rain. There was only the screaming, white-hot agony in his right shoulder and the wet, matted fur of Caesar's scruff clenched in his fist. He was hanging upside down, suspended over the abyss of Amsterdam Avenue by nothing more than the grip of a thief on his ankles. The blood rushed to his head, pounding behind his eyes like a war drum, turning his vision into a kaleidoscope of red and black. Below him, 20 stories down, the streetlights were blurring streaks of yellow, a distant galaxy that promised a terminal end. Caesar was dead weight. 50 pounds of terrified muscle dangling from Bumpy's dislocated arm. The joint had popped when he caught the dog, the ball of the humerus grinding out of the socket, tearing ligaments and stretching nerves to their breaking point. Every gust of wind that swung them caused the joint to grind, sending shock waves of nausea through Bumpy's body. But he didn't let go. He couldn't let go. His hand had locked into a claw, a rigor mortis of pure will. "Pull!" Bumpy roared, the word tearing from his throat, ragged and raw. "Pull us up!" Above him, lying flat on the wet concrete, Whispers was engaged in a battle of physics that he was losing. He had his boots hooked around a piece of rebar, his body stretched to the limit, holding the ankles of a 200-pound man who was holding a dog. Whispers was strong, wire strong, the kind of strength that comes from a life of climbing drain pipes and prying open windows. But the rain was making everything slick. "I'm slipping," Whispers screamed, his voice strained. "Bumpy, I can't get traction. You're too heavy." "Don't you let go," Bumpy shouted back, swinging in the void. "You dig in. You find the leverage." Bumpy looked down at Caesar. The dog wasn't struggling. He wasn't whining. He was hanging limp, his eyes locked onto Bumpy's upside-down face. There was a trust in those eyes that was absolute. It was the look of a creature that knew its god had caught it. Bumpy gritted his teeth, the pain in his shoulder flaring so hot he thought he might pass out. If he passed out, his hand would open. If his hand opened, Caesar fell. "I'm not leaving you," Bumpy grunted, sweat and rain mixing on his face. "Not today." On the roof, Whispers let out a primal groan. He dug his fingers into a crack in the concrete slab until his nails broke. He found a purchase. He engaged his core, screaming with the effort, and pulled. Inch by agonizing inch, Bumpy began to rise. First his knees cleared the edge, then his thighs. "Grab the rebar!" Whispers yelled. Bumpy swung his free hand, his left hand, upward. He slapped the wet concrete, his fingers scrambling for a grip. He found a cold steel rod protruding from the slab. He clamped onto it. "I got it!" Bumpy gasped. With Whispers pulling his legs and Bumpy hauling with his good arm, he dragged himself over the lip of the precipice. He slithered onto the rough, wet floor of the 20th story, dragging Caesar with him. As soon as the dog's hind legs hit the solid ground, Bumpy released his grip. Caesar scrambled away from the edge, his claws clicking frantically on the concrete, collapsing into a shivering heap near the center pillar. Bumpy didn't get up. He rolled onto his back, gasping for air, the rain washing the blood from his face. His right arm lay useless at his side, twisted at a sickening angle. The adrenaline was beginning to recede, and in its wake, the true magnitude of the pain was crashing over him like a tidal wave. He stared up at the dark, stormy sky, watching the clouds race past the open girders. "We made it," Whispers panted, crawling over to him. "Jesus, Bumpy, we made it." "The dog," Bumpy wheezed. "Check the dog." Whispers crawled over to Caesar. He ran his hands over the dog's ribs, checking for breaks. He pulled the duct tape gently off the dog's muzzle. Caesar let out a low whimper and licked Whispers' hand. "He's okay," Whispers said. "He's shaken up, but he's whole." Bumpy closed his eyes. "Good. That's good." But the war wasn't over. A sound echoed through the concrete cavern, a scrape of leather on stone. Bumpy's eyes snapped open. 10 yards away, the Russian with the scarred face, the one Bumpy had tackled before diving over the edge, was stirring. He hadn't been knocked out. He had been stunned. He was pushing himself up to his knees, shaking his head to clear the cobwebs. He looked around. He saw his dead comrades. He saw Bumpy lying prone on the floor, and he saw the shotgun lying 5 feet away. The Russian's eyes narrowed. A look of pure animal hatred twisted his face. He lunged for the weapon. "Gun!" Whispers shouted, fumbling for his own pistol, which had slid across the floor during the rescue. Bumpy tried to reach for his Colt, but it was pinned under his hip, and his right arm was dead. He couldn't move fast enough. The Russian grabbed the shotgun. He racked the slide. Ch-chick. He raised the barrel, aiming directly at Bumpy's chest. "Die, American," the Russian spat, blood dripping from his mouth. Bumpy stared down the black tunnel of the barrel. He didn't flinch. He didn't close his eyes. He just calculated the angle. Crack. The sound came from across the street, sharp and final. The Russian's chest exploded. A plume of red mist erupted from his back. The force of the round from Junie Bird's Winchester knocked him backward as if he had been kicked by a mule. The shotgun discharged into the ceiling, blowing a chunk of concrete into dust. The Russian hit the floor and didn't move. Bumpy let out a breath. He looked toward the tenement roof across the street. He couldn't see Junie in the darkness and the rain, but he knew he was there. The guardian angel with a sniper scope. "Clear," Bumpy whispered. Whispers scrambled over to the dead Russian. He kicked the shotgun away, just to be sure. Then he rushed back to Bumpy. "We gotta go, Bumpy," Whispers said, his voice urgent. "Those shots, the police will be here in 5 minutes. This whole block is going to be swarming with blue." "Help me up," Bumpy said. Whispers grabbed Bumpy's left arm and hauled him to his feet. Bumpy swayed, the world tilting gray and fuzzy. He gritted his teeth against the agony in his shoulder. He looked at Caesar. "Come here, boy," Bumpy said softly. Caesar stood up on shaky legs. He walked over to Bumpy and pressed his wet head against Bumpy's knee. Bumpy reached down with his good hand and stroked the dog's head. "Let's go home," Bumpy said. They took the construction lift down. The descent was silent, save for the rattling of the cage and the wind whistling through the shaft. When they reached the ground floor, the guard Bumpy had walked past was nowhere to be seen. Likely fled at the sound of the gunfire. They walked out to the street. Cato had the Cadillac idling at the curb, the back door already open. Junie came running from across the street, carrying the rifle case. He looked at Bumpy, saw the arm hanging limp, saw the dog, and let out a sigh of relief. "You got him," Junie said. "We got him," Bumpy corrected. "Nice shooting, Junie." "I aimed for the button on his coat," Junie said, sliding into the front seat. Bumpy and Caesar got into the back. Whispers squeezed in next to them. As the car pulled away, sliding into the rainy night, Bumpy finally allowed himself to lean back against the leather seat. "Where to?" Cato asked. "Harlem Hospital?" "No," Bumpy said, wincing as the car hit a pothole. "The cops will be at the hospital looking for gunshot wounds. Take me to Chelsea. Take me to Finnegan." Doc Finnegan's clinic was becoming a second home, a thought that brought a grim smile to Bumpy's face. The basement smelled the same, bleach and wet fur. But this time, the patient wasn't a hallucination. Finnegan was awake, playing solitaire at his desk. He looked up as the entourage burst in. Bumpy, wet and bloody, Junie carrying a rifle, Whispers looking like a drowned rat, and a black and tan dog that looked traumatized. "Busy night?" Finnegan asked dryly. "Dislocated shoulder," Bumpy said, sitting heavily on the metal table. "And check the dog. He was strung up for an hour in the cold." Finnegan moved quickly. He examined Caesar first, running his hands over the dog's limbs, checking his gums, listening to his heart. "He's tough," Finnegan said. "Hypothermia, some bruising from the rope, but nothing broken. He needs warmth, food, and rest. He'll live to chase another squirrel." Bumpy nodded. "Good. Now fix me." Finnegan turned to Bumpy. He cut the sleeve of the expensive suit away with scissors. He examined the shoulder. The joint was swollen, the ball of the humerus visibly out of place, creating a grotesque lump under the skin. "This is going to hurt," Finnegan said. "I can give you morphine, but it'll take 10 minutes to kick in." "No time," Bumpy said. "I need a clear head. Just do it." "You sure?" "Do it," Bumpy growled. He bit down on his leather wallet. Finnegan grabbed Bumpy's wrist with one hand and braced his foot against the table leg. He pulled, rotating the arm externally. The pain was a white supernova. It blinded Bumpy. It filled the universe. He groaned, a sound that vibrated deep in his chest. P-O-P. The bone slid back into the socket with a sickening thud. Bumpy slumped forward, sweating profusely, the wallet dropping from his mouth. "Done," Finnegan said, wrapping a sling around the arm. "Ice it. Keep it immobile for 3 weeks." 3 weeks, Bumpy muttered, wiping the sweat from his eyes. In 3 weeks, the world could end. He looked over at Caesar. The dog was lying on a pile of blankets in the corner, eating a bowl of kibble Finnegan had provided. He looked up at Bumpy and wagged his tail. Bumpy stood up. He felt lighter. The pain was still there, a dull throb, but the mechanical wrongness of the dislocation was gone. "Junie," Bumpy said, "go through the pockets." "What?" "The Russians," Bumpy said. "Whispers. You searched them before we left the roof, didn't you?" Whispers reached into his soaked jacket pocket. "Yeah, I went through the big guy's coat, the one in the fur hat." He pulled out a handful of items and dumped them onto the metal table. A wad of wet cash, a switchblade, a pack of Russian cigarettes, and a matchbook. Bumpy picked up the matchbook with his left hand. It was red, with gold Cyrillic lettering stamped on the cover. Below the Russian letters was an address in English: The Red Bear Social Club, Brighton Beach Avenue, Brooklyn. Bumpy stared at the matchbook. His eyes narrowed. "The Red Bear," Bumpy whispered. "Never heard of it," Junie said. "It's their hive," Bumpy said. "That's where they came from. That's where they planned this. They sat in that club, drinking their vodka, laughing about how they were going to squeeze the old man from Harlem. They looked at a map, found my building, and decided to take my heart." "So what do we do?" Goldfinger asked. "We killed the crew. The 4 guys on the roof are dead. Isn't it over?" Bumpy looked at Goldfinger. He looked at Caesar, who was licking his paws. He looked at the matchbook. "It's not over," Bumpy said softly. "You kill 4 rats. You haven't killed the infestation. You've just annoyed the nest. If we stop now, they'll think we're satisfied. They'll think the score is even." He tossed the matchbook onto the table. "I don't want even," Bumpy said. "I want to send a message that travels all the way back to Moscow. I want them to know that you can burn down a bank, you can hijack a truck, you can shoot at my men, but you do not touch my dog." "Brighton Beach is a long way, Bumpy," Junie warned. "That's enemy territory. We don't know the layout. We don't know the numbers." "Then we learn," Bumpy said. "Whispers, I want you to go to Brooklyn tomorrow. Take a look at this Red Bear. See who goes in. See who comes out. Find out who runs it." "And then?" Whispers asked. "And then," Bumpy said, putting his fedora back on, "we go to the beach." The next morning, Harlem was gray and quiet. Bumpy sat in his penthouse, watching Caesar sleep in a sunbeam on the rug. The dog was stiff, groaning when he moved, but he was home. Mamie had fussed over him for an hour, cooking him bacon and eggs, scolding Bumpy for letting it happen, and then kissing Bumpy's bandaged shoulder with tears in her eyes. "You're a crazy old man," Mamie had whispered. "Diving off a building?" "I'd do it again," Bumpy had replied. Now, Bumpy was alone with his thoughts. The adrenaline of the rescue had faded, replaced by a cold, simmering strategic anger. He thought about the arrogance of the Russians, the way they had laughed, the way they had dragged Caesar to the edge. It wasn't just cruelty, it was a lack of respect. And in Bumpy's world, a lack of respect was a death sentence. The phone rang. It was Whispers. "I'm in Brooklyn," Whispers said. "I found the place." "Tell me," Bumpy said. "It's a fortress, Bumpy," Whispers said. "Storefront is a bakery, but the back, it's a heavy-duty operation. I count 10 guards, big guys, and there's a guy running the show. I asked around. His name is Nikolai. They call him the Wolf. He's the one who sent the crew to Harlem. He's trying to make a name for himself, trying to expand into Manhattan." "The Wolf," Bumpy mused. "Appropriate. He's having a party tonight," Whispers continued. "Celebration for something. Lot of vodka going in. Lot of girls." "A celebration," Bumpy said. "Probably celebrating the 50 grand they think they're getting from me. What do you want to do?" Bumpy looked at Caesar. He looked at the city skyline. "Come home, Whispers," Bumpy said. "We have work to do. We're going to crash a party." Bumpy hung up. He called Junie. "Get the boys," Bumpy said. "Not just the inner circle. Get the heavies. Get Big Sam's crew. Get the shotguns. Get the Molotovs." "We going in loud?" Junie asked. "We're going in loud," Bumpy said. "Tonight, we aren't gangsters. We're Vikings. We're going to burn their ship." The drive to Brooklyn that night was a convoy of 3 cars, a black Cadillac, a Lincoln, and a nondescript delivery van. They moved through the city like a funeral procession, silent and grim. Bumpy sat in the lead car. His shoulder was throbbing, but the pain sharpened his focus. He checked the load in his Colt. He had practiced drawing with his left hand all afternoon. He wasn't as fast, but at close range, he didn't need to be fast. He just needed to be accurate. They crossed the bridge, the lights of Manhattan receding behind them. Brighton Beach was a different world. The signs were in Cyrillic. The air smelled of salt water and fried onions. It was a tight-knit neighborhood, suspicious of outsiders. They parked 2 blocks from the Red Bear. Bumpy got out. He was flanked by 10 men. They were the hardest men Harlem had to offer. Men who had grown up fighting for every inch of pavement they stood on. "Listen to me," Bumpy said, his voice low but carrying to everyone. "We are here for one reason, to teach a lesson. We don't hurt civilians. We don't touch the women. But any man in that club who raises a hand, you put him down." He looked at Junie. "You have the package?" Junie nodded. He held up a burlap sack. Inside, something squirmed. "Good," Bumpy said. They walked down the street. The Red Bear was glowing with light. Music, accordion and bass, thumped through the walls. Laughter spilled out onto the sidewalk. The doorman was a mountain of a man in a cheap suit. He saw Bumpy and his crew approaching. He stepped forward, reaching inside his jacket. "Niet," the doorman said. "Private club." Big Sam stepped up. He didn't speak. He just swung a lead pipe. The doorman dropped like a stone. Bumpy stepped over him. He pushed the front door open. The music was loud. The air was thick with smoke. The club was packed with men drinking, smoking, laughing. In the back, sitting on a velvet throne, was a man who matched the description of Nikolai the Wolf. He was holding a glass of vodka, toasting the room. The music died as they saw Bumpy. Silence rippled through the room, from the front door to the back. Nikolai stood up. He squinted through the smoke. "Who is this?" Bumpy walked into the center of the room. His men fanned out behind him, shotguns leveled. "I'm the man who didn't pay," Bumpy said. Nikolai's eyes went wide. He recognized the face from the newspapers. "Johnson?" "You sent men to my house," Bumpy said, his voice cutting through the silence. "You took my dog. You tried to throw him off a building." Nikolai laughed nervously. He looked at his men. There were 15 of them, but they were drunk, slow. Bumpy's men were stone-cold sober and ready to kill. "It was business," Nikolai said, shrugging. "A negotiation tactic." "It was a mistake," Bumpy said. He nodded to Junie. Junie walked forward with the burlap sack. He upended it onto the table in front of Nikolai. Rats. 20 massive, sewer-bred Harlem rats spilled out onto the table, hissing and scrambling. They were the rats Bumpy's crew caught in the tenements. They were vicious. The club erupted. Men screamed and jumped onto chairs. The rats scattered, biting ankles, causing chaos. "You like animals?" Bumpy asked calmly amidst the screaming. "I brought you some pets from Harlem. They're hungry." Nikolai drew a pistol. "Kill them!" he screamed, but Bumpy was faster. Even with his left hand, he drew and fired. Bang! The shot took Nikolai in the shoulder. He spun around, dropping his gun. "Don't kill him!" Bumpy shouted to his men. "He's mine!" The room dissolved into a brawl. Bumpy's men used rifle butts and fists. They weren't shooting to kill unless they had to. They were beating the Russians into submission. It was a barroom blitzkrieg. The Russians, drunk and terrified of the rats, crumbled. Bumpy walked through the chaos. He walked up to Nikolai, who was crawling on the floor, clutching his bleeding shoulder. Bumpy grabbed him by the hair and dragged him to the bar. He slammed Nikolai's head onto the wood. "You like heights?" Bumpy asked. "Please," Nikolai gasped.
I pay you. I give you double."
"I don't want your money," Bumpy said. He dragged Nikolai toward the back door. Junie kicked it open. It led to a small alleyway that opened onto the beach. The ocean was dark and roaring 50 yards away. Bumpy dragged Nikolai out onto the sand. The cold wind hit them.
"Where are you taking me?" Nikolai screamed.
"To the water," Bumpy said. He dragged him to the surf line. He threw him into the freezing Atlantic water. Nikolai sputtered, trying to stand. Bumpy stood on the dry sand, his silhouette framed by the lights of the boardwalk. "You stay in Brooklyn," Bumpy said. "You stay in your hole. If I ever see you, or any of your men, north of 110th Street, if I ever see you look at a dog in Harlem, I won't come back with rats. I'll come back with fire." Nikolai nodded frantically, shivering in the surf. Yes, I understand." Bumpy turned his back on him. He walked away. Junie was waiting by the boardwalk. "We done?" "We're done," Bumpy said. They walked back to the cars. The club was trashed. The Russians were beaten. The message was delivered. Bumpy got into the back of the Cadillac. He leaned his head back. His shoulder was throbbing, a deep, rhythmic reminder of the price of loyalty. "Home, Cato," Bumpy said. When he got back to the penthouse, it was late. The apartment was quiet. Bumpy walked into the living room. Caesar was sleeping on the rug. He lifted his head as Bumpy entered. He thumped his tail. Bumpy sat down in his chair. He didn't take off his coat. He just reached down and rested his hand on the dog's head. Caesar let out a sigh and went back to sleep. Bumpy looked out at the city. It was his city. And tonight, every predator in it knew that the king still had teeth. The morning sun that broke over Harlem the day after the raid on Brighton Beach was pale and watery, filtering through the smog of the city like light through dirty glass. It was a Thursday, and the streets of 125th Street were waking up to the rhythm of delivery trucks, the hiss of air brakes, and the smell of roasting coffee from the diners. To the average citizen, it was just another day in the capital of Black America. But in the underworld, the atmosphere was vibrating with a new, electric frequency. News traveled faster than electricity on the streets. By 8 a.m., everyone from the numbers runners in the Bronx to the made men in Little Italy knew what had happened the night before. They knew that Bumpy Johnson, the old king, had taken a convoy into the heart of Russian territory. They knew about the rats. They knew about the ocean. The story was already mutating into myth, growing larger with every retelling. Some said Bumpy had burned the club to the ground. Others said he had drowned the Russian leader with his bare hands. Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson sat in the kitchen of his Lenox Terrace penthouse, listening to the silence of his home. He was wearing a silk robe over his pajamas, his right arm strapped tight to his chest in a black sling. His shoulder throbbed with a dull, rhythmic ache, a reminder of the 20-story drop and the sudden, violent stop that had nearly torn his arm off. At his feet, Caesar was eating a bowl of prime ground beef mixed with raw egg. The dog moved stiffly, favoring his left hind leg where the rope had bruised him, but his appetite was back. He ate with a singular focus, pausing only to look up at Bumpy every few seconds, as if checking that the man was still there. "I'm still here, boy," Bumpy whispered, sipping his black coffee. "We're both still here." Mamie walked into the kitchen. She was dressed for church, wearing a navy blue suit and a hat with a small veil. She looked at Bumpy, then at the dog. She didn't say a word about the blood-soaked suit she had thrown in the incinerator the night before. She didn't ask about the gun Bumpy had cleaned on the dining room table at 3 a.m. She simply walked over, kissed him on the forehead, and poured herself a cup of tea. "You're famous again, Ellsworth," Mamie said softly. "Mrs. Robinson called. She said the butcher on 116th Street is giving away free bones to anyone with a dog today. He says it's in honor of the General."
Bumpy chuckled, but the sound didn't reach his eyes.
"The General? That's a new one." "Are we safe?" Mamie asked. She didn't look at him when she asked. She looked at the steam rising from her cup. Bumpy set his mug down. He looked at the scars on his knuckles. "The message was delivered, Mamie," Bumpy said. "Nikolai knows the price. He was shivering in the Atlantic Ocean when I left him. A man who is freezing to death usually finds clarity." "Usually," Mamie repeated. "But a man who has been humiliated, sometimes he finds something else." She finished her tea, squeezed his good hand, and left for St. Martin's. Bumpy watched her go. He knew she was right. Humiliation is a dangerous currency. It can buy submission, but it can also buy a suicide mission. The phone rang at 9 a.m. It was Whispers. "Bumpy," Whispers said. His voice was tight, lacking its usual cool detachment. "We got a problem." Bumpy felt a cold knot form in his stomach. "Tell me." "I stayed in Brooklyn last night," Whispers said. "Kept eyes on the club. I thought they'd pack up. I thought they'd be on the first plane back to Moscow or the first bus to Jersey." "And they aren't packing, Bumpy," Whispers said. "They're loading." "Loading what?" "Hardware," Whispers said. "Heavy stuff. They got a shipment in around dawn. Crates, long ones. Looked like surplus rifles. And they aren't fixing the windows at the club. They boarded them up from the inside. They're turning the place into a bunker." Bumpy closed his eyes. He visualized the chessboard. He had put the Russian king in check, but he hadn't mated him. He had left Nikolai alive to tell the tale, hoping fear would be enough. He had underestimated the man's ego. "Nikolai?" Bumpy asked. "He's there," Whispers said. "I saw him. He's wearing a sling, just like you. But he's shouting orders. He looks crazy, Bumpy. He looks like a man who doesn't care if he sees tomorrow." "He's coming back," Bumpy said. It wasn't a question. "I intercepted a call," Whispers said. "One of their guys used a payphone outside the bakery. He called a number in Hell's Kitchen. An Irish gun runner. He ordered cleaners. That means explosives, Bumpy. They aren't coming to talk. They're coming to scorch the earth." Bumpy hung up the phone. He sat there for a moment, listening to the clock tick. He looked at Caesar, who had finished his meal and was now sleeping in a patch of sunlight, twitching as he chased dream rabbits. Bumpy had promised Mamie they were safe. He had promised himself he was done with war for the season. But war, as he had learned in the trenches of the underworld, doesn't care about your schedule. "Junie!" Bumpy called out. Junie Bird appeared from the living room, where he had been cleaning his shotgun. "Yeah, boss?" "Get the car," Bumpy said, standing up and tightening the sling around his arm. "And call the boys, all of them. Clear the schedule." "Where are we going?" Junie asked. "Back to Brooklyn?" "No," Bumpy said. "If we go to Brooklyn, we fight on their terms. They're dug in. It'll be a siege. We bring them here." "Here?" Junie's eyes went wide. "To the apartment?" "No," Bumpy said. "To the Flash Inn. We're going to set the table for dinner. And we're going to see who has the stomach to eat." The Flash Inn was the heart of Bumpy's operation. It was a restaurant, a social club, and a fortress. By noon, Bumpy had cleared the building. The cooks were sent home with full pay. The waitresses were told to take a vacation. The customers were turned away at the door with polite apologies. Inside, the Flash Inn was transformed. The tables were overturned to create barricades. The heavy velvet curtains were drawn. Bumpy's crew, 20 hardened men armed with shotguns, Thompson submachine guns, and pistols took up positions. Big Sam was by the door. Goldfinger was in the kitchen with a sawed-off shotgun. Junie Bird was on the roof with his Winchester rifle, watching the street. Bumpy sat in the center booth, the only table left upright. He had a bottle of scotch and 2 glasses. He sat facing the door. Caesar was with him, lying under the table. Bumpy wouldn't leave the dog at home. If the Russians bypassed the flash in and went to the penthouse, Caesar would be defenseless. Here, Bumpy could protect him. "You sure they're coming here, Bumpy?" Big Sam asked, checking the load in his pump action. "A rabid dog goes for the throat," Bumpy said, pouring a drink. "This is the throat. Nikolai wants me. He wants to wash away the memory of the ocean. He knows this is where I sit. He won't go to the house, that's too quiet. He wants a spectacle. He wants to kill me on my throne." The hours ticked by. The afternoon turned into evening. The streetlights flickered on outside. The tension in the room was palpable, a physical weight that pressed on the lungs. At 8 p.m., the phone behind the bar rang. Bumpy nodded to the bartender, a man named Silk, who stayed behind to help. Silk picked it up. "It's whispers," Silk said. "They just crossed the Triborough Bridge. 3 cars, a van. They're heading west on 125th. "They're coming," Bumpy said. "Kill the lights." The flash-in plunged into darkness, save for the ambient light filtering through the cracks in the curtains. The silence was absolute. 20 men held their breath. Caesar let out a low growl, sensing the shift in the atmosphere. "Easy, boy," Bumpy whispered, resting his hand on the dog's head. "Stay low." Outside, the sound of engines grew louder. Heavy engines. Not the smooth purr of Cadillacs, but the rough idle of work trucks and old sedans. Tires crunched on the gravel of the parking lot. Car doors slammed. Then, silence. Bumpy took a sip of scotch. He waited. "Mr. Johnson!" a voice shouted from the parking lot. It was Nikolai. His voice was ragged, shouting over the wind. "I know you are in there. I know you are waiting." Bumpy didn't answer. "You think you can shame me?" Nikolai screamed. "You think you can throw me in the water like trash? I am the wolf. I eat trash. Come out, Johnson. Come out and die like a man, or we burn you out." Bumpy signaled to Sam. "Wait." A bottle smashed against the front of the building, then another. The smell of gasoline wafted through the cracks in the door. "They're Molotovs," Sam whispered. "They're gonna torch us." "Not yet," Bumpy said. "They want us to run out. They want a shooting gallery." The front window shattered. A flaming bottle spiraled into the room, landing on the carpet. Fire erupted, hungry and bright. "Now!" Bumpy roared. Junie Bird opened fire from the roof. Crack, crack, crack. The sound of the rifle shots was the starting gun. Inside the flash-in, Big Sam kicked the front door open. Bumpy's crew unleashed a wall of lead. Shotguns roared. Thompsons chattered. The parking lot turned into a slaughterhouse. The Russians were caught in the open, holding Molotov cocktails and lighter fluid. They tried to return fire, scrambling behind their cars, but they were pinned down. The surprise was total. Bumpy stayed in the booth, his Colt .45 drawn, his eyes scanning the chaos. He wasn't looking for the foot soldiers. He was looking for the leader. He saw him. Nikolai was crouching behind the engine block of the lead sedan. He was firing a pistol wildly toward the door. He looked deranged, his face twisted in a rictus of hate. "Cover me!" Bumpy shouted to Sam. "Bumpy, no!" Sam yelled. "Stay down!" Bumpy didn't stay down. He stood up. He walked out the front door of the flash-in, into the fire and the noise. He moved with a terrifying calm, his coat flapping in the wind, his bad arm strapped to his chest, his good arm extending the Colt. He walked into the parking lot. Bullets whizzed past him, kicking up sparks on the pavement. He didn't flinch. He walked like a ghost who couldn't be killed by mortal weapons. He advanced on the sedan. Nikolai saw him coming. The Russian's eyes went wide. He popped up, aiming his pistol. Bumpy fired first. Bang! The shot shattered the sedan's windshield, showering Nikolai with glass. The Russian flinched, firing his shot into the dirt. Bumpy kept walking. 10 yards. Nikolai stood up, screaming, and fired again. The bullet grazed Bumpy's coat, tugging at the fabric. Bumpy fired. Bang! The shot hit Nikolai in the leg. The Russian crumpled, dropping his gun. He tried to crawl away, dragging his shattered leg across the asphalt. The firefight around them began to die down. The surviving Russians, seeing their leader fall, threw down their weapons or ran into the night. Junie Bird picked them off as they fled. Bumpy reached the sedan. He looked down at Nikolai. The Russian was lying on his back, gasping, clutching his leg. He looked up at Bumpy with eyes full of fear. "You," Nikolai wheezed. "You are a devil." "No," Bumpy said, standing over him, his silhouette blocking out the streetlights. "I'm a man who keeps his word. I told you I would come back with fire." Bumpy holstered his gun. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the matchbook. The red matchbook from the Red Bear. He struck a match. Nikolai's eyes widened. He saw the gasoline leaking from the car's tank, pooling around him. "No," Nikolai whispered. "Please." "You touched my dog," Bumpy said. "You threatened my home. You brought war to a place of peace. There is no please left in the dictionary." Bumpy flicked the match. It tumbled through the air in slow motion. A tiny star falling into a black sea. It hit the gasoline. Whoosh! The world turned orange. Bumpy turned and walked away. He didn't run. He walked with the same steady, rhythmic gait he always used. Behind him, the sedan erupted into a fireball, the heat pressing against his back like a heavy hand. He didn't look back. He walked back into the Flash Inn. The sprinklers had come on, dousing the carpet fire. His men were standing amidst the smoke and the water, looking at him with awe. Bumpy walked to the booth. Caesar was sitting there, barking at the noise. Bumpy reached down and clipped the leash onto the dog's collar. "Let's go, Caesar," Bumpy said. "It's too loud in here." He led the dog out the back door, through the kitchen, into the quiet alleyway. The sounds of the sirens were getting louder, closing in from all sides. The police were coming. The fire department was coming. The reporters were coming. But Bumpy was already gone. He walked Caesar down the alley, onto a side street, and hailed a cab. The driver, an old man who knew better than to ask questions, took one look at Bumpy, wet, smelling of smoke, with a bandaged arm and a dog, and simply nodded. "Where to, Mr. Johnson?" "Lenox Terrace," Bumpy said, "and take the long way. I want to see the river." The fallout from that night changed the landscape of the New York underworld for a decade. The Russians didn't come back. The Red Bear Social Club in Brooklyn closed down a week later. The landlord found it abandoned, the rats gone, the windows boarded up. The message had been received in Brighton Beach, and it had traveled all the way to Moscow. Harlem is closed for business. The Italian Commission, rather than being angry about the noise, sent a case of wine to the penthouse. Fat Tony Salerno respected strength, and Bumpy had shown that he was still the strongest man in the room. The police investigation went nowhere. Witnesses vanished. Evidence was lost. The official report called it a gas leak explosion. But the real ending of the story didn't happen in a blaze of glory. It happened on a quiet Tuesday morning, 3 weeks later. The weather had turned properly cold. Winter was settling in. Bumpy sat on a bench in Marcus Garvey Park, his arm finally out of the sling. He was wearing a heavy wool coat and a cashmere scarf. He was throwing a tennis ball. Caesar chased it. The old dog was slower now, his gait a little stiffer from the trauma of the roof, but he was happy. He retrieved the ball and trotted back, dropping it at Bumpy's feet, his tail wagging, his breath puffing in the cold air. Bumpy picked up the ball. He looked at the dog. He looked at the scars on the animal's muzzle, the gray in his fur. He saw the mirror of his own life. "We're getting too old for this, Caesar," Bumpy said softly. Caesar barked, a sharp, joyous sound that echoed off the trees. Bumpy smiled. It was a genuine smile, rare and fleeting. He threw the ball again, watching it arc through the gray sky. "Go get it, boy," Bumpy whispered. "Go get it." As the dog ran, bounding through the dead leaves, Bumpy Johnson leaned back on the bench and closed his eyes. He listened to the city. He listened to the wind. And for the first time in a long time, he didn't hear footsteps behind him. He didn't hear the click of a gun. He just heard the sound of a dog playing and the steady, unbreakable beat of his own heart. The king was safe. The castle was secure, and the dog was happy. Thanks for listening, folks. If you liked that video and want more, be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss any Bumpy Johnson stories.